Some games fail not because they're bad, but because they arrive too early, too different, or too misunderstood. The PlayStation 2 era was full of hidden gems that slipped through the cracks. Titles that reviewers dismissed, players ignored, or marketing completely botched. Yet years later, these same games are praised as cult classics, artistic, experimental, and ahead of their time. They were the kind of games that prove failure doesn't mean forgotten. If you end up liking the content, please subscribe for more, and I'd appreciate it if you give it a thumbs up and tell me what you think down below. Love to hear it. When God Hand launched in 2006, critics tore it apart. Reviewers called it clunky, weird, even broken. But time has been kind to this chaotic beat 'em up. It's now seen as one of the boldest, most creative action games on the PS2. Directed by Shinji Mikami, the mind behind Resident Evil 4, this wears its absurdity proudly. It's part martial arts parody, part fever dream, and part hardcore combat simulator, all wrapped in a world that makes no sense, but feels perfect in its nonsense. The humor is ridiculous, the tone unpredictable, and the gameplay brutally precise. It's not cinematic polish, it's pure mechanical genius. The combat system is its beating heart. Instead of canned combos, it gives you total control. Every move can be customized. Enemies don't just absorb hits, they react, forcing you to adapt, learn, and master spacing. It's the kind of game that punishes button mashing, but rewards skillful rhythm. Once it clicks, you realize it's not messy, it's intentional. The exaggerated animations, over-the-top taunts, and comedic boss fights are all part of a larger dance between chaos and control. Narratively, it's absurd in the best way. A wandering martial artist protecting a divine arm while fighting demon clowns, Elvis impersonators. It sounds insane, and it is. But that camp is the point. God Hand is a satire of action game tropes, and it knows it. Its corny one-liners and bizarre cutscenes make it feel like a playable grindhouse movie. It flopped because it refused to conform. Reviewers didn't know what to make of it, and audiences were expecting another polished Capcom hit like DMC. Instead, they got a game that demanded mastery and laughed at its own difficulty. But years later, God Hand is celebrated as a masterpiece of intentional chaos, a brawler that hides true brilliance behind a mask of insanity. It didn't fail because it was bad. It failed because it was too good to be understood. Okami is one of the greatest artistic achievements in gaming history, and one of the biggest commercial failures of its time. Released in 2006 by Clover Studio, it arrived at the end of the PS2's life cycle, just as the industry was shifting toward HD consoles. Despite critical acclaim, it sold poorly, but its beauty and creativity have only grown more revered with time. This game is a living painting. Every frame is drawn in vibrant sumi-e brushstrokes, creating a moving canvas that feels more like interactive art than software. It's the kind of visual storytelling most games still struggle to match. You play as Amaterasu, the sun goddess reborn as a white wolf, tasked with restoring light and color to a world consumed by darkness. The game blends exploration, combat, and puzzle solving, but what sets it apart is the celestial brush, a mechanic that lets you literally draw your way through the world. With a flick of the analog stick, you can slash enemies, paint the sun into the sky, or bring dead trees back to life. It's creative, tactile, and deeply symbolic. Every stroke feels like participation in the story's myth-making. Tonally, the game radiates optimism. It celebrates nature, beauty, and rebirth with a warmth few games dare to embrace. The sweeping orchestral score, inspired by traditional Japanese music, gives it an emotional depth that rivals film soundtracks. Even its humor, playful, self-aware, and full of personality, balances perfectly with its mythological grandeur. But for all its artistry, it suffered from timing. Released when players were flocking to the PS3 and 360, it didn't stand a chance commercially. Its long runtime and slow start also turn away those expecting fast-paced action. Yet, as the years passed, its reputation transformed. Gaming's greatest missed masterpiece today is rightfully celebrated as one of the PS2's defining works.
yearn for your father.
Released in 2007, Odin Sphere was the kind of game that critics adored but almost nobody bought. Arriving at the tail end of the PS2's life, it slipped under the radar, buried beneath the rise of HD consoles. Yet it stands today as one of the most visually breathtaking and emotionally resonant titles of its generation. This game is a hand-painted masterpiece, a side-scrolling action RPG that plays like a playable storybook but unfolds with the complexity of a Shakespearean tragedy. The art direction alone could stop you in your tracks. Every frame looks like an illustration from a fairy tale. Rich colors, fluid animations, and intricate details that feel more alive than most 3D games of its era. The camera pans and transitions during combat are deliberate, giving each battle a sense of stagecraft. The entire experience feels choreographed rather than coded. It's not cinematic in the traditional film sense. It's theatrical, painterly, and deeply expressive. Its narrative structure is just as ambitious. Instead of following one hero, it tells 5 interconnected stories, each from a different character's perspective. Their tales overlap, contradict, and reinforce each other like an ensemble film, culminating in a final act that ties every thread together. Themes of love, sacrifice, and destiny run through it all, and the writing treats each character, princess or warrior, with dignity and depth. The English voice acting and orchestral score enhance its film-like presence, wrapping tragedy in elegance. Still, it wasn't easy to digest. Its frame rate drops and repetitive combat turned away players expecting traditional action, and its slow, introspective pacing didn't fit the mainstream PS2 audience. In hindsight, Odin Sphere is the definition of a misunderstood masterpiece. A game that dared to be art when everyone else was chasing spectacle. It may have flopped in sales, but it succeeded in soul, and that deserved far more eyes on its pages. Siren was too strange, too slow, and too unforgiving for mainstream audiences. Players were baffled by its difficulty and structure, and critics struggled to categorize it. But beneath that initial frustration lay one of the most hauntingly original horror games ever made. Directed the creator of Silent Hill, this didn't just borrow from horror cinema. It became horror cinema. Every frame, every sound, every fade to black felt like a deliberate act of filmmaking. It wasn't about cheap scares. It was about building dread through perspective, patience, and confusion. Set in a rural Japanese village cursed by a supernatural siren that turns its residents into blood-eyed monsters called Shibido, the story unfolds across multiple characters and timelines. That fragmented storytelling, told through jump cuts, overlapping scenes, and shifting perspectives, feels like an experimental horror anthology rather than a typical game narrative. You're constantly piecing together who's alive, who's already gone, and what's real. It's disorienting by design, evoking the same unease as a psychological thriller where every answer only spawns more questions. What makes it cinematic isn't spectacle, but tension. The grainy textures, muted colors, and documentary-style lighting make it feel like you're watching found footage rather than playing a game. The innovative sight-jacking mechanic, which lets you see through the eyes of nearby Shibido, is pure film technique. An interactive version of the horror camera trope, where the audience watches danger approach before the protagonist does. Its voyeurism is gameplay, and it's brilliant, but Siren's genius also doomed it commercially. Its difficulty curve, complex timeline, and opaque storytelling turn away players expecting Resident Evil. It didn't fail because it was bad. It failed because it treated its horror like more than a game. It's a cinematic descent into paranoia, loss, and the eerie beauty of hopelessness. Shadow Hearts had everything working against it when it launched in 2001. It was released just after Final Fantasy X. It lacked big-name marketing, and its grim, gothic tone didn't fit the colorful optimism most RPG fans were used to. It sold modestly and faded fast, but those who played it discovered something rare, a dark, emotional masterpiece that blended horror, history, and heart in a way few games have since. Beneath its modest visuals and strange premise was a story that hit harder than anyone expected. Set in an alternate version of early 20th century Europe and Asia, it follows Yuri Hyuga, a sarcastic, reluctant hero who can fuse with demons using his own soul. It's a strange mix of supernatural horror and character drama, told with sharp writing and a cinematic flair. The camera angles are dynamic, often tilting and framing scenes like a horror movie. The pre-rendered backgrounds glow with eerie atmosphere, each one drenched in mood and dread. The world feels alive, mysterious, and dangerous, every location dripping with personality. The game's turn-based combat hid a brilliant innovation: the Judgment Ring. Instead of selecting commands passively, you had to hit precise, timing zones to attack or defend. It added tension and rhythm to battles, keeping you engaged even during long fights. The system was cinematic in its own right. Each spin of the ring felt like a heartbeat before a strike. What truly made this special, though, was its tone. It didn't shy away from tragedy, loss, or love. Its writing mixed dark humor with moments of real humanity, giving the story emotional weight rare for its time. Yuri's internal struggle, fighting both literal demons and personal guilt, gave the game depth most RPGs only hinted at. It may not have sold millions, but Shadow Hearts built a dedicated cult following, spawning 2 sequels and earning retroactive praise as one of the PS2's most underrated gems. It dared to be different, and its brilliance only grew with time. When Ico released in 2001, it was met with confusion more than excitement. Many critics appreciated its beauty, but mainstream audiences didn't quite know what to make of it. There were no flashy combos, no HUD, no score counter. Just a boy, a mysterious girl, and a crumbling castle bathed in sunlight and silence. It sold poorly, overshadowed by louder, faster games of the era. But over time, the quiet genius revealed itself. What seemed simple back then now feels profound. It wasn't a game about winning. It was a game about connection. The story is minimal but deeply human. You play as a horned boy, imprisoned for being different, who escapes and finds a fragile girl who doesn't speak your language. Together, you navigate the castle, solving puzzles and evading shadowy creatures trying to drag her back. The gameplay is built around cooperation, holding her hand, leading her gently, waiting for her to catch up. These small gestures build emotional weight over time until you realize the hand-holding mechanic is the soul of the game. It doesn't tell you to care, but makes you care through action. Visually, it was revolutionary. The lighting, the natural animations, the sense of scale, it all felt cinematic yet intimate, like an art house film that unfolded through gameplay. The castle becomes a character through its decaying halls and echoing chambers, communicating loneliness more effectively than dialogue ever could. The ambient sound design, the rustle of wind, the flutter of birds, creates an atmosphere of melancholy and peace. You don't just explore a space, you feel it breathing around you. Its flaws were misunderstood as emptiness. Critics at the time called it slow and empty, but that simplicity was intentional. Ico wasn't chasing action, it was chasing emotional depth. Years later, it became a cornerstone of game design philosophy. What once seemed like a small, strange game now stands as one of the PS2's greatest artistic triumphs. When Beyond Good and Evil launched in 2003, Ubisoft had high hopes. It was meant to be a bold new franchise that would rival the likes of Zelda and Tomb Raider. Instead, it crashed commercially. It sold poorly, got lost amid big-name releases. But time has rewritten its legacy. What the market ignored, players later embraced. A deeply emotional, beautifully crafted adventure that mixed journalism, rebellion, and heart into one of the PS2's most soulful games. The story follows Jade, a photojournalist uncovering government corruption and alien conspiracies. Unlike most heroes of the time, she isn't a warrior but a seeker of truth. That alone gave the game a cinematic identity all its own. The camera moves like it's following a documentary, with dynamic framing during action and lingering close-ups during quiet moments. You can feel the story breathe, each beat delivered with the pacing of a well-edited film. The tone shifts effortlessly between humor, mystery, and heartbreak, all held together by Jade's grounded humanity. The gameplay blended stealth, puzzle solving, exploration, and photography in a way that felt organic. Taking photos of the world's wildlife wasn't just a side quest. It was storytelling through perspective. You saw the world through Jade's eyes, both literally and emotionally. Even the supporting characters were written and voiced with cinematic care, their performances layered with warmth and wit. The score ties it all together, mixing tribal beats, choral harmonies, and intimate melodies that evoke the heart of a classic film soundtrack. But there was more marketing, bad timing, and confusion about what it even was. It didn't fit the mold. It wasn't purely action or stealth or RPG. It was beyond genre. Now, it's celebrated as one of the most human adventures ever made. Every camera shot, every emotional pause feels directed. Beyond good and evil flopped in numbers, but artistically, it soared higher than most of its peers.
Prepare to set sail.
Few PS2 games embodied creative freedom like Steambot Chronicles, and few were punished as harshly for it. It was marketed poorly and misunderstood by almost everyone who played it. Was it an RPG, a life simulator, or a mech adventure? The truth is, it was all of them. It's one of those rare games that feels alive, unscripted, and deeply human. Its world isn't about saving the universe. It's about living in it. And that quiet ambition made it one of the most cinematic, character-driven experiences of its generation. You play as Vanilla Bean, a laid-back amnesiac who wakes up on a beach and slowly discovers a world powered by trotmobiles, steam-driven vehicles that act as both transportation and weapons. But instead of pushing you into a linear plot, the game lets you choose your path. You could be a musician, a merchant, a fighter, or even a criminal. The choices aren't dramatic, they're personal. Like a slice of life film, it finds its beauty in the mundane. The dialogue and camera work contribute to its cinematic tone. Conversations play out with real-time gestures and expressions rather than static portraits, and the camera lingers naturally instead of cutting abruptly. The world has a sunlit, nostalgic glow that feels like a late summer coming-of-age movie. The jazz-inspired soundtrack gives every scene rhythm. It wasn't flawless. Its controls were awkward, its combat clunky, and its pacing uneven. But that roughness gave it authenticity. Like an indie film, it felt handcrafted rather than corporate. The writing had heart, humor, and sincerity that made its world feel genuinely lived in. Steambot Chronicles failed commercially because it didn't fit any mold. It wasn't loud enough for action fans or structured enough for RPG purists. Yet in hindsight, it was one of the PS2's most quietly revolutionary works. A cinematic sandbox before the genre even existed. It flopped on paper, but succeeded in spirit. An unsung masterpiece that dared to slow down and let you exist. When Haunting Ground released, most players didn't even notice it. It came quietly, was marketed poorly, and often dismissed as Resident Evil with a dog. But this wasn't just about running from monsters. It's cinematic horror not through spectacle, but through intimacy. Every shot, every sound, every hesitation feels deliberate, like a director constructing dread frame by frame. You play as Fiona, a young woman who awakens trapped in a castle filled with deranged pursuers and disturbing secrets. The tone is immediately unsettling. No weapons, no combat mastery, just the constant terror of being hunted. The camera frames her like a protagonist in a gothic film. Fragile yet determined, isolated in vast halls drenched in candlelight and decay. The way the camera lingers just a bit too long on her footsteps or swings wildly when she panics isn't just technical design, it's emotional direction. The fear doesn't come from jump scares. It comes from how the game shows fear. Then there's Huey, the dog who becomes Fiona's partner and protector. Their bond evolves naturally, and that relationship becomes the emotional core of the experience. Commands aren't just gameplay mechanics. They're trust, patience, and communication made tangible. The castle itself is majestic and horrifying, full of thematic detail. Mirrors, cages, and fragmented reflections of humanity fill every room. The sound design builds psychological unease, faint breathing, distant footsteps, music that fades in and out like it's synced to your heartbeat. Haunting Ground explores mature, even disturbing, ideas about control, fear, and femininity without ever being exploitative. It's horror as commentary, not shock value. It failed commercially because it didn't fit any genre mold. It was too subtle for action fans and too personal for typical horror audiences. But over time, it's become a cult classic, often called the spiritual successor to Clock Tower. Few PS2 games are as infamous as Rule of Rose. Released in 2006, it was attacked by controversy before players even got their hands on it. Rumors about its content spread across Europe, leading to bans and moral outrage. But the truth was far more nuanced. This wasn't exploitative, it was allegorical. Beneath its disturbing imagery lay a story about trauma, class, and childhood cruelty. Like a psychological horror film, it demanded interpretation rather than reaction. Sadly, the noise drowned it out, and it flopped. You play as Jennifer, a young woman trapped in a twisted orphanage run by children who form a cruel aristocracy. What follows isn't a typical horror story. It's a descent into memory, guilt, and repression. The cinematography is meticulous. The camera drifts slowly, often framing Jennifer off-center to highlight her disorientation. The muted color palette and 1930s setting make the game feel like a lost European film, melancholic, poetic, and grim. It's not a game about monsters. It's a game about the monstrousness of childhood innocence gone rotten. The sound design amplifies that feeling. There's no bombastic soundtrack, just haunting strings, echoing whispers, and the occasional lullaby twisted into something sinister. The pacing is slow, intentionally suffocating, forcing you to sit with discomfort rather than run from it. The storytelling unfolds through symbolism and fragmented flashbacks, making it feel less like a linear narrative and more like a psychological reconstruction. Its combat was awkward and its mechanics rough, but those flaws almost work in its favor. The clumsiness reinforces Jennifer's helplessness, the same way a shaky camera can heighten realism in film. Rule of Rose was never meant to be popular. It's uncomfortable, sad, and deeply human. A tragic meditation on cruelty and memory disguised as survival horror. It remains a game that doesn't scare you with monsters. It scares you with truth.